Hello, how are you? We're going to take a look at Gary Kildall today. Who is Gary Kildall? He is really, I would say, in the top 5 most influential people in the history of the PC. And we're going to take a look at him right now. Gary Kildall. You don't know much about him. He died in 94, which he died pretty young. And honestly, part of what happened to him, or what happened to him, is part of his death. There's quite a bit of information out there on him. This is Wikipedia's page. This is the Computer History Museum, which has in his own words, you can read about what happened to him. PBS actually had, Who Made America? He was part of that, which is pretty prestigious. And then digital research. This page is actually digital research's little page that's left about them, who they were, and how influential he was. So let me just start off by saying Gary Kildall was genius. Let's take a look at the things he did. Okay, so we'll describe why the situation happened in a minute. Gary Kildall creates an operating system known as CP/M. Now, the situation basically is that, right, you've got Atari, Apple, and Commodore all coming forward between 75 and 77 with computers. That's what's happening at the time. And this is really the first big manufacturers of computers. IBM had created a PC. They didn't call it a PC, and they structured pricing according to their mainframe. So the thing was like $4,000, $5,000. And so that didn't go over too well. And that was in the 70s. That may have been 74. I can't remember. I'll talk about it in another video. But then later on in the 80s, they realized, wow, this thing's going gangbusters. We need to get in there and do something. And they basically are playing a little catch up. So besides those companies, what did all these people that were building their own computers use? Gary Kildall's stuff. They use CP/M. So CP/M, by the time that DOS comes around, has got hundreds of thousands of software applications running on it, and it runs across many, many, many systems. And they were making about 5-6 million a year on selling this. So I'm trying to show you that, hey, this was the big dog at the time. CP/M was it. This guy was it. He had about him and 6 people that were working with him. Originally, they just worked out of their house, and they were just really smart, right? He was a genius, and he got other geniuses, and bam, that's the way they worked. And so he creates this control program /M, which is monitor. So if we pull that up right there, you can see it. Control program, monitor, later control program for microcomputers. So very descriptive. It was a control program. That's right. You didn't say you had an operating system. This was a program specifically designed to control the system's hardware so that you could run software on it. It would make your system more capable, right? Back then, I mean, it's a very weird thing to think, but back then, if you really wanted to say, well, I'm going to make a word processor, this is my idea, I'm going to have an electronic typewriter. You didn't have an OS. And so you would have had to have created that and then had your word processor run on top of it, right? So I created the program. Now you can create your processor, your word processor. So later on, because it was a monitor, right? It's monitoring things. It becomes the control program for microcomputers. Again, so early dated that you're not saying it's an operating system. That term comes out later. And it was written for 8-bit processors. So you got all this stuff people are just putting together. And as long as you put it together that is similar to the other guy, not the same, but similar, then you can run CP/M on it. As a matter of fact, he spent a lot of his time actually customizing the software. So you had CP/M, and then a system might be put in at a business that has 1,000 employees. And so they bought this hardware, and he would customize that OS to run with that hardware without a problem. Now, basically, we don't know anything about him because Microsoft is the one that wins the bid with IBM. And we're going to get into that. But this guy, I mean, he actually, if you read down through this, you'll see this. He's actually the one that develops the concept of preemptive multitasking. In other words, I'm going to have the computer do two things. And in order for it to do two things, I've got to be able to preempt what's happening and put another in its place. And there was preemptive multitasking and cooperative, and preemptive is what we use now. He was the person that developed the BIOS. How do I deal with the hardware? And you can kind of see that in the name, right? It's a control program for microcomputers. It's, in other words, I need to control the hardware. I need an interface between the hardware and what the software wants to do. I need those two things. And so he's the father of the BIOS, right? He pioneered this concept. So even the UEFI that comes back to us, now that's what we use. He's the father of that. He's the one that really started that off. He figured out how computer hardware, ROMs and EPROMs, should be able to hold operating system files and how it would deal with that. He actually later on, right, he continues with CP/M and 86 model version, runs on IBM. He ends up creating a programming language, implementation of the PLI programming language. He implements basically a structure for programming straight for the PC architecture. That's not what Microsoft did. They basically ported BASIC and updated it, right? Made it more flourished. And that came from a mainframe system, and they ported it over. So he like made this up, right? He developed this. And CD-ROMs, yeah, he actually dealt with, down here someplace. Now there's the graphical. Someplace in here, it talks about the fact that he was so fascinated with CDs that he created the file system that the CDs would be able to access data. So even today, as you say, this comes on a DVD, or I'm going to store it on a CD. The roots of what he did is in what we do now, which is fantastic. And specifically, he basically took an encyclopedia and was able to port it over, make that happen on a CD-ROM drive, because he could see, wow, this is going to be so huge for us. And it was for a time, right? Pre-internet. Anyway, so why don't we know anything about him? Let's dig into that. Basically what happens is, again, IBM is behind in what they're doing. They're realizing, oh crap, we really missed this. And so they don't have time to develop anything particular to them. So they do the same thing everybody else is doing. There's a controller for this. There's a CPU for that. Let's put it all together. Our engineers will make that work. Now we need an operating system. So this is what happens. They go to Bill Gates. And you may think, well, why wouldn't they go to Gary? He's the one making $5 million a year off of this stuff. Well, there's a couple of things here. Now, probably the biggest thing is that just because you work for IBM doesn't mean you know everything about computers and how things are functioning in the business. It's kind of like saying HP is a huge company, right? You can go work for HP and never really know who does what out there, right? Who's really behind AI, that kind of thing. You don't know those individuals. So they go over to Microsoft and say, hey, look, we're going to produce this, and we want you to get some software for us. And this is our list. We need some software that does stuff. We need an operating system. And yeah, definitely BASIC, right? Because you've got BASIC running on all these different things. And that means that as soon as you get the computer, I can program it. So if I don't want to buy something else, I can program it to do what I want. That was a big selling point. And they're like, well, hold up here. We don't make operating systems. You need to talk to GaryKildall. He's kind of down the road a bit. Go see him. All right, so the other thing behind this is something known as the NDA, a non-disclosure agreement. It's standard in business, and what it means is you can't talk about things. And of course, IBM's the big dog. So basically, it's all weighted one direction. It's basically the NDA says you can't talk about anything we say, but we can talk about everything you say. Well, IBM, that's the way they ran things. And Microsoft, of course, signed off on that. So that's a smart business move, right? Microsoft's like, yeah, I get it. You're the big dog. We're just going to have to do what you say. That's basically what happened. And so that's what they do. Well, that doesn't happen over with GaryKildall. So Gary's out on an install. So he's out installing. I mean, this is what he gets paid for. He's going to go install this custom OS. I can't remember, CPM that's customized for somebody. It's in his history. And so he's going and doing that. He flew his own plane. He flies up there to go do that. Plus his wife deals with all of it, right? His wife is the person that deals with business aspects. So let's come down here a ways. There's him and his wife. It's him and his kids. There's him and his kids. His kids are going to be R2D2. Right. And then there's him and his wife. So Dorothy is the one that handles the business side of things. So they come to Dorothy and say, hey, yeah, we want you to sign this NDA. And she's like, nah, I'm not going to do that. Sitting with her lawyer, right? I'm not going to do that. This basically says you can take anything in our conversations and tell anybody you want, which, we have secrets, right? We're making $5 million a year. We're not doing it. So when Gary gets back, they talk about it and they're like, shoot, I don't know. So he calls up, and according to his words, he calls up and talks to the main dudes at IBM that had flown over and said, hey, maybe we can work this out. And they kind of do a little discussion on the phone. And according to Gary, come to a determination of IBM licensing this operating system because they'd be up and running, right? You've already got applications for it, right? So you'd really be up and going. But IBM doesn't want that. IBM wants to control it just like they controlled mainframes. So they don't want to license anything. So they go back to Microsoft, unbeknownst to this couple, and basically say, it's not going to work out with Gary. Can you get us an OS? And so that's when Bill Gates says, yeah, I'll get you an OS. Now, some people criticize him for that. They say, hey, Bill should have told them. But again, you've got a non-disclosure agreement that they could sue you over, right? So he goes out and buys, according to some people, an operating system called QDOS, or Quick and Dirty Disk Operating System, which was just a ripoff of what you see on the screen. So it was a ripoff of CPM. But again, back then, you don't have any laws about this. I mean, is writing software a book? I mean, what's protected, what's not protected? And even now, you could rip off Microsoft and create an OS that's very Microsoft-like. And if it got popular, then Microsoft could come after you, right? If not, they probably wouldn't care too much. They could sue you, but they probably wouldn't. So Microsoft ends up, this is the ironic part, of telling IBM, we're going to license this to you. So yeah, the licensing fee, I'm sure, was much smaller. We don't know. Those things are all hidden. But it's probably a lot smaller, so IBM wouldn't be paying as much, but they wanted to own it. And so they come up with an agreement with Microsoft that they would joint develop what was coming after DOS. And that was going to be released, by 1990. And so they end up in the same situation, right? So they could have paid GaryKildall this fee, which again is higher, I'm sure, and had somebody that probably would have worked specifically for them and gotten residual pay from IBM on whatever the next operating system was. But instead, they go with Microsoft. And what is Microsoft? Well, Microsoft's a software company, basically into programming. That's always been their strength. And they just bought an operating system and said, okay, let's just tweak this to make it work. And so you don't have any of the genius that really was right here in GaryKildall and his team and who he had developed, and all those incredible things that came from him, right? Could have been a part of that whole scenario, but we don't know anything about him because he gets left out of that deal with IBM. And while according to him, he's kind of got some bad feelings or had some bad feelings towards Microsoft, it was a lot more ill feelings towards IBM because he thought he had this verbal agreement that they later deny ever having with him. But this guy ends up continuing to take that CP/M and move it forward. And honestly, later on, he comes out with Dr. DOS, which is Digital Research DOS, but it was DR DOS. So most people called it Dr. DOS. I was going to find it here. And he continues to move that forward. He creates concurrent DOS. In other words, again, a the ability to run different programs at the same time in the disk operating system, not even needing anything else. CD-ROMs, of course, BIOS, and all of that. Creating a way to deal with floppy disks and hard disk drives. That was kind of the first some things that he did. Again, running on 3,000 different models. Wow. And then he creates a graphical system. So as you start to look and go, okay, Mac is releasing something. That's the first Mac is in 84, Amiga's 85, and 85. He also creates something known as GEM. And I think I just closed GEM. I just did. I hate it when it does that. This is actually DOS 2.0, not DOS, Windows 2.0. So this is what Windows looked in its second revision. And why I pulled that up is so you can see what GEM is like. Those two would be the same year that they were created. And so that's really pretty rudimentary there. And then we got, if you search for GEM, TOS, they actually make this graphical system, and Atari ends up using it. And that's not at all. Oh, there's one. There's one of them. So we're starting to get some. And this is what it looks like. So we'll pull this one up. We'll view this file. That's quite a larger file. A way to access the floppy disks, get to what you want to search. This is a special search, throwing the trash away and having different options across this. So he creates this graphical environment and has it out and running before Microsoft really has anything better. They really don't have anything better. And this would run on all sorts of systems, just not Ataris, but all sorts of systems. And again, right, that innovation gets stalled and has to happen later. Because Microsoft is the one that's controlling that situation, is controlling what's happening. So the competition can't get out. So anyway, I would invite you to go out to archive.org, take a look at the Computer Chronicles. Again, the Internet Archive on archive.org has got great stuff. You should really check it out. Old softwares out there, old game ROMs, all sorts of stuff is out there. And GaryKildall, this is the Computer Chronicles they did in celebration of his life. And he was actually one of the hosts on there. That's not him. That was the other host. And you can kind of go back in time and take a look at some things. They even have virtual reality, 1992 right there. They've actually got some, it's interesting to see some of their old stuff out here. Where they're looking at machine intelligence and artificial intelligence and how it's working in 1986 or not, to think what they were going to do with it. And again, that's just to show you also the fact that, hey, a lot of the stuff that you're looking at now and you think, wow, this is really cool and new, they've been in development for it for quite some time. And so here's some of the little history, how IBM ended up using MS-DOS rather than CP/M. And I bet you half of it's wrong, probably. We know a lot more now because of what Gary released. Anyway, thanks for watching. Little quiz about this stuff. And we'll talk to you later.